You settle into your chair, the room dim, the quiet pressing gently against your ears, and you let yourself drift into the world of sound. Jian Ghomeshi's voice comes to you, smooth, deliberate, and magnetic. A voice that once dominated Canadian airwaves with authority and charm. It is the voice of CBC's Q, a program that, at its height, felt like the pulse of contemporary culture. You can almost hear the subtle intonations, the pauses calibrated for effect, the warmth that invited millions of listeners to feel as if they were in the same room with every guest. But as you listen tonight, you know the story will not stay in the comfort of melody and intellect. This is the story of a career and a persona that would unravel under the weight of serious allegations. Welcome to 102 Hours, where we explore the line between public adoration and hidden harm. While you breathe slowly, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your location and local time, we are gathering stories across the world, one listener at a time. Tonight, we trace Jian Ghomeshi's path from acclaim to infamy, and we do so gently, slowly, as you sink deeper into the narrative. Born in 1967 in London, England, Ghomeshi's early life was shaped by the migration of his Iranian family to Canada, settling in Thornhill, Ontario. You imagine the young Jian, curious and restless, navigating adolescence in a new country, attending Thornleigh Secondary School, already showing signs of ambition and charisma. He was a keen musician, forming bands that experimented with folk, pop, and satirical music, ultimately leading him to the Canadian pop-folk group Moxie Fruvus. The band's clever, humorous songs captured a niche audience, giving him a taste of public attention and laying the groundwork for his understanding of performance and audience engagement. You can almost picture him on stage, guitar in hand, the crowd laughing at witty lyrics while marveling at his ability to command attention effortlessly. Mainstream fact: Moxie Fruvus toured extensively through the 1990s, earning critical acclaim for their witty, satirical performances and building a loyal Canadian fanbase. This period not only honed Ghomeshi's public persona, but also immersed him in the world of media, publicity, and networking, skills that would later prove pivotal in his broadcasting career. Quirky tidbit: even in those early years, Ghomeshi developed a fascination with theatrical props, particularly hats, collecting dozens that he would cycle through during performances. Some bandmates joked that he wore a different hat for every song, a small eccentricity that hinted at his attention to image and persona. Transitioning to broadcasting, Ghomeshi joined CBC in the early 2000s, first as a producer and eventually as the host of Q in 2007. The show's success was immediate. Listeners were drawn not just to the interviews, but to the intimacy he created in the studio. You sense the meticulous care with which he prepared, researching guests deeply, framing questions that revealed both personality and insight. His ascent seemed inevitable, his star power undeniable. Still, investigators would later question whether the charm and meticulous preparation that made him such a compelling broadcaster were used to manipulate and control interactions off the air. Some colleagues described moments where warmth shifted suddenly into intimidation or pressure, leaving staff uncertain and anxious. The duality between public adoration and private tension is the first shadow you notice in this story, a subtle reminder that appearances can be deceptive. You recognize the paradox as you listen. Ghomeshi's rise was fueled by intelligence, charisma, and talent. Yet, the very qualities that propelled him to prominence may have also contributed to the behaviors that later sparked allegations. It is a story of contrasts, of the light of public acclaim against the darkness of private controversy. As you exhale, you feel the gravity of what comes next, the unraveling of a figure who once seemed untouchable. This is the opening act of a journey through ambition, charm, scrutiny, and the complicated legacy of a man whose voice once captivated a nation. You step quietly into the CBC building in Toronto, the fluorescent hum washing over you as the echo of footsteps fades down long hallways. The atmosphere in the corridors is deceptively ordinary. Computers whir, phones ring, staff chatter, but behind the glass walls of Q's studio, there's a different energy, one you can almost feel pressing through the air. Jian Ghomeshi presides over the studio like a conductor over an orchestra, every cue, pause, and tone of voice deliberate. To the listeners at home, the studio is a haven of warmth, insight, and charm. But behind the walls, the narrative is more complicated. Those closest to him describe a man capable of shifting between intense attentiveness and sharp criticism, a duality that creates tension beneath the polished surface. You imagine the young producers arriving early, headphones on, trying to anticipate his mood, careful not to upset the delicate rhythm of the day's recordings. Mainstream fact. Internal CBC reviews later revealed multiple employees had reported incidents of aggression and harassment, yet management repeatedly downplayed these complaints, prioritizing the star power of Ghomeshi over staff concerns. These warnings spanned years and suggested patterns of behavior that were not addressed until the allegations became public. Quirky tidbit. Some staff noted that Ghomeshi kept a conspicuous collection of guest thank you notes and memorabilia pinned around his workspace, a subtle yet visible testament to his influence. While meant to reflect professional pride, the display also became a symbol of untouchability, a quiet reminder that reputation and access to celebrity could outweigh employee grievances. In the studio, the tension is almost tangible. Colleagues recount times when the same person who could be generous and engaging moments earlier would suddenly become critical or dismissive, turning small mistakes into charged encounters. It is in these spaces, between takes, behind closed doors, that the duality of Ghomeshi's persona is most apparent. Charming, disarming, and authoritative on the air. Unpredictable and intimidating behind the microphone. Still, investigators would later question whether the very charisma that elevated him publicly was used to control and manipulate interactions in private. Was his charm a tool, a mask, or simply a complex personality trait misread by colleagues? These questions linger because behavior that appears dynamic in a creative workspace can sometimes obscure patterns of coercion or discomfort. You notice that while audiences hear confidence, wit, and engagement, the producers and staff operate in a delicate balance of admiration, fear, and careful negotiation. The studio, which should be a place of collaboration and creativity, becomes a microcosm of the broader dynamics of power, influence, and the uneasy intersection of personal behavior with professional consequence. It is here, in these quiet moments behind the studio glass, that the first subtle signs of what would become a public reckoning are visible, if only to those who are paying close attention. Mainstream fact, Q achieved unprecedented ratings during this period, turning Ghomeshi into a household name. His interviews were lauded for depth and style, and CBC's leadership celebrated the program as a cultural flagship. Yet, the very environment that produced this success was riddled with overlooked reports and unaddressed complaints, highlighting a disconnect between public acclaim and internal reality. Quirky tidbit. Some staff recalled that Ghomeshi had a habit of giving small, personalized gifts to select colleagues, like vinyl records or quirky hats, while excluding others. These gestures, seemingly generous, contributed to a culture of favoritism, leaving some staff feeling both flattered and anxious about their standing. As you lie back, you can almost sense the paradox. The same individual who brought warmth, intelligence, and connection to millions of listeners also fostered unease and tension in the spaces where his influence was most direct. The charm and intimidation coexist in the same moments, leaving staff navigating uncertainty and admiration simultaneously. The story of Ghomeshi, you realize, is not just about the voice that captivated a nation. It is about the behind-the-scenes pressures, the unspoken rules of behavior, and the early signs of controversy that would later erupt. The studio becomes a stage not just for interviews, but for understanding the contradictions of charisma, authority, and power. Still, investigators would later question whether CBC-AWS management knowingly enabled the environment that allowed these dynamics to flourish. Was it oversight, complicity, or a combination of both? The answers remain part of the larger conversation about workplace culture, accountability, and the subtle ways authority can silence or intimidate. You feel the tension in the corridors long before the public hears a single headline. It is 2014, and murmurs of concern about Ghomeshi's behavior begin circulating among CBC staff. You picture whispered conversations in office corners, emails drafted and left unsent, hesitant phone calls to human resources, all signaling discomfort that is difficult to confront directly. The man celebrated for his eloquence, insight, and charm is also becoming a source of fear and uncertainty behind the scenes. Staff describe moments where compliments on work performance are paired with uncomfortable, personal comments, a mixture that leaves colleagues questioning how to respond. These are the first cracks in a carefully curated public persona, visible only to those who work in proximity to him. Mainstream fact. By late 2014, several formal complaints had been filed with CBC's Human Resources Department. These reports alleged unwanted physical contact, verbal harassment, and inappropriate behavior in professional settings. Despite the complaints, CBC leadership initially took minimal action, in part due to Ghomeshi's status as a high-profile broadcaster whose ratings and reputation were invaluable to the network. This inaction would later become a central focus of public criticism, illustrating how institutional priorities can conflict with employee safety. Quirky tidbit. Some employees noted that Ghomeshi's office often contained unusual props, a mix of musical instruments, exotic hats, and stacks of interview notes that seemed innocuous at first, but in hindsight, contributed to an environment where boundaries were ambiguously defined. It was as if the space itself mirrored his duality, warm and inviting for some, intimidating for others. Still, investigators would later question whether the early complaints could have predicted the full scale of allegations that were about to surface. Did these reports signal patterns of misconduct that were ignored? Or were they isolated incidents misinterpreted through the lens of stress and ambition? The ambiguity fuels debate among legal scholars, workplace ethicists, and media commentators alike. The first public hints emerge when former colleagues share limited anecdotes with journalists. Some describe moments of coercive behavior during interviews, while others recount witnessing what they felt was undue pressure or intimidation. The accounts are fragmented and inconsistent, but they collectively reveal a pattern of behavior that contrasts sharply with the confident, polished image broadcast to millions. You sense how this duality, private intimidation versus public charm, sets the stage for the later legal and social reckoning. Mainstream fact. In 2014, Ghomeshi was suspended by CBC pending an internal investigation. The suspension, framed as a measure to ensure workplace safety, also prevented him from further hosting duties while the allegations were evaluated. Media coverage at the time emphasized the sudden nature of the suspension, creating widespread curiosity and speculation. Quirky tidbit. The day of the suspension, a handful of staff reportedly left small paper hats on his desk as a silent commentary on his obsession with headwear, mixing humor with subtle critique. While seemingly trivial, this gesture encapsulated the odd culture within the studio, a mix of reverence, fear, and playful resistance. You notice the emerging narrative. The man who commanded a nation in as attention with eloquence and wit is now quietly facing scrutiny from those closest to him. The unfolding situation highlights the complexities of addressing misconduct when the accused is both influential and beloved. Public perception is blind to these nuances. They are confined to whispered exchanges, cautious emails, and hesitant HR meetings. Still, investigators would later question whether CBC's management could have intervened more effectively. Were the warnings ignored due to Ghomeshi's cultural capital, Or did the complaints genuinely seem insufficient to warrant decisive action at the time? The ambiguity underscores how institutions navigate risk, reputation, and employee safety, often leaving victims and bystanders frustrated with the pace of accountability. This moment, early in the unfolding scandal, establishes the dual narrative that will dominate the coming years: a celebrated public figure whose private behavior elicits concern, and a media organization grappling with the tension between star power and moral responsibility. You feel the quiet unease of this period, a prelude to the storm that is about to engulf both Ghomeshi and the network he once defined. You feel the shift as the whispers escape the confines of office corridors and enter the public sphere. It is late 2014, and the story of Jian Ghomeshi is no longer confined to internal memos or HR reports. It is on the news, discussed in cafes, shared on social media. You imagine sitting at your desk, scrolling through updates, sensing the dissonance between the polished, charming voice you've always known on cue and the troubling reports now emerging. Suddenly, the comfortable intimacy of listening to the radio is replaced by tension, questions, and unease. This is the moment when private discomfort collides with public scrutiny, and the country begins to confront the possibility that a cultural icon may have betrayed trust. Mainstream fact: in October 2014, CBC officially terminated Jian Ghomeshi's employment. The network cited evidence of inappropriate behavior, while emphasizing its commitment to employee safety and workplace integrity. This firing sent shockwaves across Canada, making headlines not only for the dramatic fall of a prominent figure, but also for the broader questions it raised about institutional accountability and workplace culture in high-profile media organizations. Quirky tidbit: Ghomeshi's sudden absence sparked an unusual fan response online. Some listeners, still charmed by his earlier work, created satirical GIFs and memes portraying empty radio studios with forlorn microphones, humorously lamenting the loss of a voice, even as serious discussions about misconduct unfolded. The juxtaposition of levity and severity highlighted the public's struggle to reconcile admiration with outrage. Still, investigators would later question whether the timing and manner of the public disclosure impacted both ongoing investigations and survivors' willingness to come forward. Could the media attention have empowered victims, or did it risk contaminating evidence and complicating legal processes? These questions remain part of the broader conversation about the interface between justice and publicity. Following the firing, Ghomeshi's reputation began to unravel at unprecedented speed. Sponsors, colleagues, and friends distanced themselves, and the CBC faced intense scrutiny for its previous handling of complaints. You can almost hear the echo of emergency meetings, boardroom deliberations, and public statements aimed at damage control, as leadership grappled with the fallout from decisions made over years of inaction. Mainstream fact: in the months after the firing, Canadian media conducted investigative reporting that revealed systemic patterns of negligence, including the dismissal of prior complaints and informal warnings from staff that went unheeded. These findings intensified public debate about accountability in high-profile workplaces and the responsibilities of institutions toward their employees. Quirky tidbit: some staff and cultural commentators jokingly referred to a CBC shadow cabinet of former employees and whistleblowers who became unofficial advisors on ethical workplace practices, highlighting a mixture of cynicism and earnest reflection as the organization sought to learn from its missteps. As you listen to these events unfold, you realize that this is more than a simple scandal. It is the convergence of power, fame, and institutional failure. The public break exposes not only Ghomeshi's alleged misconduct, but also the vulnerabilities in systems meant to prevent and respond to abuse. For the nation, it is a moment of reckoning, a time when admiration clashes with accountability, and when the familiar voice on the radio becomes a symbol of both charisma and caution. Still, investigators would later question whether CBC's public handling of the case sufficiently addressed the root problems, or merely aimed to contain reputational damage? The debate continues. Can organizations truly reform under pressure, or does public scrutiny only prompt superficial changes? The questions linger as the narrative moves from private concerns to national discourse, setting the stage for the legal proceedings and societal reflection that would follow. You feel the atmosphere tighten as the legal system enters the story. By late 2014, the whispers and media reports transform into formal criminal charges against Jian Ghomeshi. Allegations of sexual assault and choking are now under scrutiny in Canadian courts, and the narrative shifts from internal office concerns to questions of law, consent, and justice. You can almost hear the click of courtroom doors opening, the shuffle of lawyers' papers, and the muted murmur of spectators waiting for a high-profile trial to begin. The man who once commanded a nation's attention through eloquence and charm is now facing a public reckoning with the legal system. Mainstream fact. In December 2014, Ghomeshi was charged with 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of overcoming resistance by choking. The charges were based on the testimonies of 3 women who came forward, alleging assaults that occurred between 2002 and 2003. These charges marked a historic moment, as a prominent Canadian broadcaster was publicly accused of serious crimes, prompting nationwide discussion on sexual violence, media responsibility, and workplace safety. Quirky tidbit. During this period, social media users noted an unusual spike in searches for how to press charges and consent in Canada, revealing that the case not only captivated public attention, but also inadvertently sparked widespread public education on sexual assault law. Some legal commentators jokingly referred to it as Ghomeshi 101, a stark reminder of how high-profile cases can illuminate societal blind spots. Still, investigators would later question whether media coverage of the charges influenced witness testimony or the willingness of additional accusers to come forward. While the spotlight provided a platform for survivors, it also added layers of pressure and public scrutiny that complicated the legal landscape. The announcement of charges instantly polarized the public. Some Canadians struggled to reconcile the Ghomeshi they admired on air with the accusations now leveled against him. Fans expressed disbelief, questioning how someone so articulate, witty, and cultured could commit such acts. Others rallied behind the accusers, recognizing the courage required to bring allegations against a figure of immense public influence. The tension reflected a larger societal struggle: how to navigate the intersection of fame, credibility, and accountability. Mainstream fact. Following the charges, CBC and other media outlets launched internal investigations and implemented reforms aimed at preventing harassment and abuse, though public criticism often focused on whether these changes were reactive rather than proactive. The case became a benchmark for workplace accountability in Canadian media. Quirky tidbit. Some legal observers pointed out that the court filings included unusual details, like specific patterns of email and messaging behavior, which became talking points in media analysis. The minutiae of daily communications offered a glimpse into both workplace dynamics and the emerging strategies of legal teams navigating high-profile sexual assault cases. You notice the duality of this moment. Ghomeshi, once untouchable in the public eye, now stands at the center of a legal storm that will define his legacy. The courtroom becomes a stage not just for justice, but for societal reflection on the complexities of consent, the influence of celebrity, and the challenges survivors face when speaking out. Still, investigators would later question whether the public spectacle surrounding the charges hindered or helped the pursuit of justice, a dilemma that underscores the tension between media attention and fair trial procedures. The balance of transparency, survivor support, and legal integrity becomes a recurring theme as the case unfolds. You can almost hear the echo of the courtroom doors closing, the soft shuffle of papers, and the quiet anticipation of the public and press. Jian Ghomeshi sits at the defendant's table, calm and composed, but the weight of national attention presses down around him. The trial is not just a legal proceeding, it is a cultural moment, a point where media, society, and law intersect in ways both profound and uncomfortable. You sense the collective holding of breath across Canada as journalists, lawyers, and citizens watch every development, each testimony adding layers of tension to a story that has captivated the nation. This is no longer the voice you listen to on the radio. It is a man facing scrutiny under the impartial gaze of justice. Mainstream fact: the trial officially commenced in 2016. Ghomeshi faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of overcoming resistance by choking. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimonies of the complainants, as well as corroborating evidence such as emails, text messages, and witness accounts. The defense argued that the encounters were consensual and sought to undermine the credibility of the complainants, raising complex questions about memory, interpretation, and the nature of consent. Quirky tidbit. Observers noted that courtroom sketches became a surprisingly popular form of social commentary during the trial, with artists capturing expressions and gestures that subtly conveyed tension, skepticism, or surprise. These sketches circulated widely online, becoming a visual shorthand for the unfolding drama and reflecting the public ICS fascination with every nuance of the proceedings. Still, investigators would later question whether the intense media coverage influenced public opinion or created pressures that shaped witness testimony. The balance between transparency and fairness became a recurring challenge, highlighting the tension inherent in high-profile cases. The courtroom itself is a study in contrasts. On one side, the accusers sit composed, recounting traumatic events with meticulous attention to detail, their voices steady but filled with emotional weight. On the other side, Ghomeshi's demeanor is measured, calculated, his public persona as a confident communicator on full display. The trial exposes the deep gulf between perception and reality, between how one is remembered by millions and how one is experienced privately. Mainstream fact: during the trial, the credibility of the complainants was scrutinized extensively, including their personal communications and social media activity. The defense highlighted inconsistencies to challenge the prosecution's narrative, a strategy that sparked widespread debate about the nature of evidence in sexual assault cases. Quirky tidbit. A particularly memorable moment occurred when a technical glitch caused the courtroom AOS microphones to pick up faint ambient sounds, leading to humorous commentary and media coverage about the contrast between high drama and mundane background noise. It was a brief, humanizing note in an otherwise serious, tense environment. As the trial progresses, you begin to sense the broader societal implications. It is not just about one man or his alleged actions. It is about how institutions, media, and culture respond to allegations of sexual assault. It is about power, credibility, and the challenge of reconciling public perception with private experience. The courtroom becomes a microcosm for these struggles, a space where law, morality, and social judgment converge. Still, investigators would later question whether the trial's intense scrutiny ultimately advanced public understanding of consent and accountability, or whether it amplified sensationalism at the expense of nuanced discussion. The ambiguity lingers, reflecting the complexities that arise whenever celebrity intersects with serious allegations. You step into the whirlwind of headlines, tweets, and televised debates, where Jian Ghomeshi's name dominates every channel. The public sphere feels charged, almost electric, as Canadians wrestle with the tension between admiration for a media figure and the seriousness of the allegations against him. You can imagine scrolling through your phone late at night, the soft glow illuminating countless opinions, some in disbelief, defending his charm and intellect, others expressing outrage, solidarity with survivors, and frustration at institutional failures. The media frenzy becomes its own character in the story, shaping narratives, framing testimonies, and influencing the emotional tenor of a nation watching the case unfold. mainstream fact. In 2015 and 2016, Ghomeshi's case was covered extensively by national media, including CBC, The Globe and Mail, and major television networks. Public discussions ranged from legal analyses to debates about workplace culture, consent, and the responsibility of organizations in preventing harassment and assault. The intense coverage reflected both the celebrity status of Ghomeshi and the broader societal questions raised by the allegations. Quirky tidbit: online forums and social media gave rise to parody accounts and satirical hashtags referencing Ghomeshi's on-air persona, his signature hats, and the dramatic courtroom exchanges. While humorous, these online artifacts illustrate how the public coped with complex emotions through cultural commentary, blending entertainment and ethical reflection in unexpected ways. Still, investigators would later question whether the pervasive media coverage shaped the willingness of additional accusers to come forward or influence the perception of witnesses who were part of the legal proceedings. The intertwining of law and media introduced layers of complexity that affected both the case and public understanding. Within the swirl of reporting, you sense the duality. Ghomeshi as both a man and a symbol. His professional brilliance and charisma are constantly contrasted with allegations of misconduct, creating a cultural paradox that Canada struggles to reconcile. The courtroom, the airwaves, and the pages of newspapers collectively construct a narrative that is difficult to disentangle, blurring lines between factual reporting, interpretation, and opinion. Mainstream fact: polls conducted during this period suggested a deeply divided public, with significant portions of the population both condemning and defending Ghomeshi, reflecting the tension between perceived personal behavior and public achievement. This division mirrored broader societal debates about consent, accountability, and the treatment of sexual assault allegations involving prominent figures. Quirky tidbit: some journalists reported that during court breaks, Ghomeshi's staff would circulate playlists of his favorite songs in the newsroom, an almost surreal mix of everyday media culture and ongoing legal drama. The practice highlighted the bizarre coexistence of normalcy and scandal in the professional environment surrounding him. You begin to understand that public opinion is not monolithic. It is shaped by selective media narratives, personal biases, and the power of celebrity. Every article, tweet, or broadcast influences perception, sometimes reinforcing existing beliefs, other times challenging them. This dynamic becomes a central theme in Ghomeshi's story, the dissonance between image, reality, and the court of public opinion. Still, investigators would later question whether the overwhelming media attention obscured nuanced understanding of consent and legal procedure, or whether it served as a catalyst for national dialogue and awareness. Either way, the intensity of coverage marked an era in Canadian media history, illustrating how high-profile cases can ripple across society, shaping discourse far beyond the courtroom walls. You can feel the tension tighten as the trial moves into its most dramatic phase. Witnesses take the stand, recounting experiences that are deeply personal, and the courtroom becomes a theater of testimony, emotion, and legal strategy. You almost hear the soft rustle of papers, the measured voice of the judge, and the careful questioning from attorneys. The proceedings are meticulous, intense, and at times excruciating, both for those involved and for a nation following closely. This is where private pain collides with public scrutiny, where each statement is dissected, challenged, and amplified in real time. You are a silent observer of a process that balances empathy, evidence, and procedure, feeling the gravity of every detail as it unfolds. Mainstream fact: during the 2016 trial, 3 women testified against Jian Ghomeshi, providing detailed accounts of alleged sexual assaults. The prosecution presented emails, text messages, and corroborating witness accounts to support their claims, while the defense challenged the credibility of the complainants and emphasized inconsistencies in recollections, framing the encounters as consensual. The legal process highlighted the difficulties inherent in sexual assault cases, particularly when involving private interactions and limited physical evidence. Quirky tidbit. Courtroom observers noted that small details, like Ghomeshi's meticulous grooming and choice of attire, became points of public fascination, reflecting the ongoing tension between performance and substance. Sketch artists, journalists, and social media users commented on how even appearances seemed to convey personality and intent, blending cultural observation with legal reporting. Still, investigators would later question whether intense focus on Ghomeshi's demeanor and style may have inadvertently influenced perceptions of credibility, both in the courtroom and among the public. These subtle psychological effects highlight how trial dynamics extend beyond formal arguments to include observation, interpretation, and unconscious bias. The courtroom drama is amplified by the clash of narrative and memory. Complainants recount specific events with clarity and emotional weight, yet the defense probes every detail, emphasizing perceived inconsistencies. The tension is palpable. Each question, pause, and response is a delicate negotiation between truth, perception, and legal strategy. You sense the weight of this balance, understanding that courtroom narratives are constructed not only through what is said, but also through timing, emphasis, and framing. Mainstream fact. The trial featured significant discussion of Ghomeshi's communications with alleged victims, including emails and text messages that were scrutinized for tone, content, and timing. Legal experts noted the challenges of interpreting digital communication in sexual assault cases, as context and nuance often become central points of dispute. Quirky tidbit. Observers humorously noted that the courtroom's ambient sounds, the occasional cough, chair scrape, or whispered note, were magnified under the intense media coverage, turning minor distractions into viral anecdotes. These moments served as brief, humanizing interruptions in otherwise serious proceedings. You realize that this phase of the trial is more than evidence presentation. It is an emotional, psychological, and cultural display. The public watches closely, drawing conclusions, empathizing, and debating, while the legal system attempts to weigh credibility, evidence, and procedural fairness. This dual layer, the legal process and societal interpretation, creates a complex narrative where law and culture intersect, often messily. Still, investigators would later question whether the intense media presence shaped witness behavior or testimony, highlighting the delicate interplay between transparency, accountability, and influence. The courtroom drama becomes both a site of justice and a mirror, reflecting societal tensions about consent, authority, and public perception. The courtroom is quiet, almost reverent, as the moment arrives that will determine the outcome of Jian Ghomeshi's trial. You can feel the collective anticipation, the press poised with pens, cameras angled, and citizens watching from afar, some holding their breath. It is the culmination of months of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments. You sense the gravity pressing down on everyone present, the weight of expectation and consequence palpable in the still air. This is the moment when the law must decide. Yet you also know that public opinion will remain divided, carrying its own judgments regardless of the verdict. Mainstream fact. On March 24, 2016, Jian Ghomeshi was acquitted of all charges. The judge cited inconsistencies in the testimony of the complainants and a lack of corroborating evidence as key factors in the decision. The acquittal sparked widespread debate about the justice system, the handling of sexual assault cases, and the challenges victims face when pursuing legal action against high-profile figures. Quirky tidbit. Media outlets noted that Ghomeshi's supporters and detractors alike were compelled to comment on his attire as he left the courthouse, a striking combination of tailored suit and scarf, demonstrating how even fashion became entangled in the public narrative, almost as if appearance could influence perception of character. Still, investigators would later question whether the acquittal reflected limitations of evidence, the legal standards applied, or broader societal biases regarding credibility and sexual assault. These questions underscore the complexity of adjudicating intimate and contested events within formal judicial systems. The reaction to the verdict is immediate and polarized. On social media, hashtags praising the acquittal trend alongside those criticizing the outcome and expressing solidarity with the accusers. You feel the tension between relief, outrage, and disbelief, a reflection of the deep societal struggle to reconcile public admiration, legal principle, and ethical expectation. The courtroom outcome, while legally definitive, does not settle moral or cultural debates. Mainstream fact. In the wake of the acquittal, CBC faced criticism and introspection, leading to internal reforms regarding workplace conduct, harassment policies, and the handling of employee complaints. The case became a catalyst for national discussions about workplace culture and institutional accountability. Quirky tidbit. Some observers noted that courtroom sketch artists created exaggerated depictions of the scene, highlighting the emotional intensity in contrast to the otherwise stoic environment. These artistic interpretations became widely circulated, further shaping public perception beyond the legal facts. You notice the duality of this moment. The acquittal resolves the legal question, yet the court of public opinion continues to weigh both the actions of Ghomeshi and the institutional responses that preceded the trial. The story does not end with the verdict. It evolves, influencing societal conversations about consent, power, and accountability in media and beyond. Still, investigators would later question whether the intense media scrutiny, public opinion, and high-profile nature of the case affected both courtroom proceedings and witness willingness to participate fully, highlighting ongoing challenges in balancing transparency and fair trial considerations. As you reflect, it becomes clear that the verdict is a hinge point, an event that transforms a private and internal struggle into a national reckoning about fame, influence, and ethical responsibility. You are left considering not just the legal outcome, but the broader implications for society and the culture of accountability. The news of Jian Ghomeshi's acquittal ripples through Canada like a sudden, jarring wave. You feel it in the muted conversations at coffee shops, the heated debates on social media, and the tense editorial meetings at newspapers and broadcast studios. The man once celebrated for intellect, charm, and cultural insight is now a symbol of controversy, sparking reflection, outrage, and discussion nationwide. It is a moment where collective consciousness wrestles with the tension between legal verdicts, ethical judgment, and public trust. You sense the unease in the air, the unspoken question: how could a beloved voice become so divisive, so polarizing? Mainstream fact. Following the acquittal, many journalists, academics, and commentators published essays and op-eds analyzing the case. Discussions focused on consent, the credibility of survivors, institutional accountability, and the societal implications of sexual assault trials involving high-profile figures. These reflections highlighted gaps in understanding and the need for cultural and educational change. Quirky tidbit. Some satirical publications ran tongue-in-cheek Ghomeshi survival kits for radio listeners, including miniature microphones, earplugs, and tiny hats, playful artifacts that underscored the bizarre intersection of pop culture, scandal, and public coping mechanisms. While humorous, these kits reflected a public grappling with complex emotions through levity. Still, investigators would later question whether the intense polarization of public opinion influenced victims' willingness to speak out in other high-profile cases, raising concerns about societal pressures, support structures, and the long-term impact on reporting of sexual misconduct. You notice that the backlash is not uniform. Some segments of the public express relief, celebrating the acquittal as a triumph of the legal system. Others voice outrage, frustration, and empathy for the accusers, emphasizing systemic challenges in proving sexual assault cases. The intensity of the discourse demonstrates the difficulty of separating emotion from evidence and perception from principle. Mainstream fact. Canadian universities and workplaces began implementing more comprehensive sexual assault education programs in the wake of the Ghomeshi case, aiming to foster awareness, prevention, and survivor support. These reforms reflected a recognition of cultural shortcomings illuminated by high-profile trials. Quirky tidbit. In some online discussion forums, users created elaborate flowcharts mapping Ghomeshi's career trajectory versus a scandal timeline, blending humor with analytical curiosity. The meticulous diagrams, while playful, illustrated a public attempt to contextualize complex events in visual form, bridging entertainment and reflection. Still, investigators would later question whether this media-saturated environment allowed nuanced conversations about consent to flourish or merely amplified polarization, making it more challenging to address root causes of workplace harassment and abuse. As you consider the broader impact, it becomes clear that the Ghomeshi case is not just a story of one individual, but a reflection of society's evolving understanding of power dynamics, workplace ethics, and sexual misconduct. The public backlash, while intense and sometimes divisive, also prompts conversations about cultural norms, institutional responsibility, and the need for vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals. You feel the tension, the lessons, and the ongoing ripples of this chapter in Canadian cultural history. Still, investigators would later question whether the lessons learned were effectively institutionalized or remained largely performative, underscoring the ongoing challenge of translating scandal into systemic change. You can almost sense the careful steps as Jian Ghomeshi attempts to re-enter the public sphere, a man trying to reclaim relevance after a storm of controversy. You picture press releases, podcast appearances, and social media posts, all calibrated to control narrative, rebuild credibility, and present a curated version of self. Yet the shadow of past allegations follows him, making every move a delicate negotiation between past notoriety and present ambition. The public's memory is long, and the tension between personal reinvention and societal scrutiny is palpable. You feel the undercurrent of anticipation. Can a once-celebrated media figure survive the aftermath, or will the weight of infamy always define him? Mainstream fact. In the years following his acquittal, Ghomeshi launched a memoir and participated in interviews discussing his life, career, and the trial. The book's reception was mixed. Some praised his narrative voice and reflection, while others criticized it as self-serving and insufficiently acknowledging the perspectives of alleged victims. The memoir became part of the broader cultural discourse on accountability, narrative control, and celebrity rehabilitation. Quirky tidbit. During the promotional tour for his memoir, Ghomeshi reportedly carried a small collection of hats from his earlier broadcasting days to autograph for fans, blending nostalgia, humor, and a subtle reminder of his former persona. The gesture was widely noted in media coverage as both endearing and awkward, highlighting the tension between charm and controversy. Still, investigators would later question whether such public attempts at rehabilitation undermine or support broader societal understanding of accountability and consent, particularly when high-profile figures control the narrative. Ghomeshi's attempts at re-establishing a career reveal the complexities of public perception. While some audiences remain sympathetic, others maintain skepticism, viewing every public appearance as a test of sincerity, credibility, and accountability. You sense the friction in every interview, measured responses, careful phrasing, and strategic omissions, all designed to navigate a landscape where trust is tenuous and scrutiny relentless. Mainstream fact. Despite efforts to rebuild, Ghomeshi has not returned to mainstream broadcasting in a significant capacity. His attempts at public engagement have been largely confined to writing, podcasts, and limited media appearances, reflecting both personal choice and public reluctance to embrace him fully. Quirky tidbit. Podcast audiences noted Ghomeshi's tendency to reference past radio shows and behind-the-scenes stories, creating a meta-narrative that blends personal history with professional reflection, sometimes eliciting laughter, sometimes discomfort. These moments exemplify the ongoing negotiation between entertainment and accountability. Still, investigators would later question whether the public forgiveness of high-profile figures like Ghomeshi is contingent on narrative control, selective memory, or broader cultural dynamics, raising critical questions about celebrity, ethics, and redemption. You notice that this chapter of Ghomeshi A.'s life is emblematic of a broader societal pattern. Individuals navigating rehabilitation after public scandal must contend with legal outcomes, public perception, and personal reflection simultaneously. The tension between private growth and public acceptance defines this stage, underscoring the ongoing negotiation between past actions and present identity. Mainstream fact. Cultural commentators often cite the Ghomeshi case when discussing the challenges of career rehabilitation post-scandal, reflecting on how media, law, and public opinion interact to shape narratives of redemption and accountability. Quirky tidbit. Some literary reviewers joked about the difficulty of writing self-reflective yet persuasive memoirs in the shadow of controversy, humorously noting that no hat collection could fully distract from the public memory of scandal. You settle back, letting the story of Jian Ghomeshi sink slowly, like the low hum of a radio fading at night. The rise, the talent, the allegations, the trial, the acquittal, all of it forms a complex mosaic that resists simple interpretation. You sense the cultural weight of the case, a reflection of how society navigates power, accountability, and morality. Ghomeshi's career is both a cautionary tale and a lens through which broader questions about consent, workplace culture, and institutional responsibility can be examined. It is a story that lingers long after the headlines fade, challenging assumptions and prompting reflection on the delicate balance between public persona and private behavior. Mainstream fact. The Ghomeshi case has had lasting implications in Canadian media and beyond. It prompted organizations to revisit harassment policies, improve reporting mechanisms, and create educational programs about consent and workplace conduct. Legal scholars have also examined the case as a benchmark for understanding the challenges inherent in prosecuting sexual assault allegations involving prominent figures. Quirky tidbit. Pop culture references and satirical sketches continue to appear, reminding the public of the odd intersections of fame, media, and scandal. From gifts of studio microphones to playful nods at his hat collection, these artifacts underscore how society processes difficult subjects with a mixture of humor and critical reflection. Still, investigators would later question whether the cultural lessons taken from the case fully address systemic issues or simply highlight isolated failures. How much has truly changed in institutional culture, and how much is performative adaptation to public scrutiny? These questions remain part of the ongoing dialogue. The legacy of Jian Ghomeshi is multifaceted. For survivors and advocates, it represents both the courage required to come forward and the challenges of seeking justice against influential figures. For institutions, it emphasizes the importance of proactive, rather than reactive, responses to allegations of misconduct. For the public, it offers a chance to reflect on the dissonance between admiration for talent and recognition of ethical breaches. Mainstream fact. Surveys and studies conducted in the years following the trial indicate a heightened public awareness of workplace harassment and sexual assault, suggesting that high-profile cases like Ghomeshi's have tangible effects on societal attitudes and policy priorities. Quirky tidbit. Universities and media organizations occasionally use anonymized reenactments of the case in training sessions, blending narrative storytelling with ethical instruction. Some students even create mock radio shows to explore dynamics of power, consent, and professionalism, turning history into interactive learning experiences. Still, investigators would later question whether the focus on celebrity overshadowed ordinary survivors' experiences, prompting debate about whose voices are amplified and whose are marginalized in media narratives. It is a reminder that cultural reckoning is never complete. It evolves as society continues to grapple with justice, ethics, and accountability. You feel the quiet finality of this story, tempered by reflection rather than drama. The lessons of Ghomeshi's rise and fall echo beyond the headlines. The allure of charisma, the responsibility of institutions, the courage of those who speak out, and the necessity for ongoing societal vigilance. This is a story of contrasts, success and scandal, voice and silence, public perception and private reality, that leaves you contemplative, aware that the narrative is as much about culture as it is about an individual. Still, investigators would later question whether true systemic change has taken root or if cultural memory simply recycles sensational moments, highlighting the ongoing responsibility of institutions, media, and individuals to remain vigilant. As you lie back, you notice how the story of Jian Ghomeshi unfolds not only through headlines and courtroom proceedings, but through subtle cultural, institutional, and personal dynamics. It is a narrative of contrasts, reminding us that human behavior, institutional decision-making, and public perception are deeply intertwined. The tale prompts reflection on trust, charisma, power, and accountability, offering lessons for media organizations, society, and individuals alike. You feel the echo of those voices, both celebrated and silenced, resonating in your mind, a quiet reminder of the complexity inherent in judging human behavior. It is not simply a story of fame or scandal. It is a meditation on responsibility, ethics, and the ongoing dialogue about consent and respect. In the calm of your room, with the gentle cadence of this ASMR narration wrapping around you, consider the layers of the story: the rise to prominence, the allegations, the trial, the verdict, and the lingering cultural reflections. You are not just observing. You are participating in a collective examination of values, courage, and accountability. This is the essence of reflection, the space where story meets conscience and where learning from the past informs the present. Breathe slowly. Let the complexity settle. Remember the importance of vigilance, empathy, and integrity in every space you occupy, whether personal or professional. The lessons of Jian Ghomeshi, story remain as relevant today as they were in the days of headlines, courtrooms, and conversations that shook a nation.